folks, I'm Dr. Jamara Welch of the Supermodel Society, where we seek to influence, educate, and inspire. And for today's Inspire series, I'm happy to introduce Dr. Jeshana Avent-Johnson. Dr. Avent-Johnson, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so before we get started, I do want to share with viewers a little bit about you. So I have your bio that I'm going to share right now.
Mhm.
So Dr. Jeshana Avent-Johnson is a licensed clinical psychologist, certified clinical trauma professional, and registered yoga instructor. She is the founder of the Intimacy Seminars and Psychological Services located in Southern California. Dr. Avent-Johnson specializes in couples, sex, and relationship therapy. Using a culturally meaningful systems-based therapy, Dr. Johnson focuses on helping you reach your relational potential by increasing your capacity for intimacy and passion. Her clinical experience has been significant in helping individuals and couples develop and evolve by providing a window into themselves and their partner. Dr. Johnson challenges individuals and couples to hold on to self and operate from the best in them. That's personal integrity, while maintaining relationships with others. Dr. Johnson's intimacy seminars have been sought out by many churches, organizations, and homes across the United States, West Africa, and London. She has been happily married to her high school sweetheart for 26 years and is proudly called mom by 2 adult children. Dr. Johnson, thank you again for joining today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And as I told you before, I still don't believe that you have 2 adult children. I'm sorry. I just don't. I just
Well, I started young as part of my story.
Okay. Okay. Well, before we dive into the questions I have for you today, I do want to tell viewers just a little bit about how I met you. So last year, 2019, during the fall, my cousin and our soror invited me to an intimacy seminar. And when I got the invitation, I was looking sideways, like, what is going on here? An intimacy seminar, like, what is that? And so, but because it's my cousin, I trust her. So I was like, okay, we'll give this a try. And I tell you, I have not stopped talking about it. It was such a wonderful time. My husband and I had a great time. So much so that we invited you to come to our home and actually conduct an intimacy seminar, and it was phenomenal. So with that, let's start right there. Tell us about your intimacy seminars. How did that come to be? How did you start that? Start from the beginning.
Okay, so as a woman who has been married for 26 years, I'm gonna have to go back, right? So I'm gonna have to go back and tell you about how I've come to this place. I believe that the relationship between the spouse, the couple, is the foundation of the family. And
Mm-hmm.
so when you have a healthy, good relationship between the spouses in that relationship, then you can have good, healthy views and sex and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can raise good, healthy children, which makes good, healthy families. And
Right.
then that creates good, healthy communities. But the reason why intimacy seminars kind of started is because I myself wanted the fairy tale. Like we see the
Mm-hmm.
movies, we see all of that, things like that growing up. And I wanted the fairy tale. I wanted to happily ever after, the ride off into the sunset. But I wasn't fortunate enough to have those kind of examples in
Mm-hmm.
my life, right? So when I got married at a young age, the only thing that I knew how to do was actually get a divorce
Mm.
and or be in a relationship that came at the expense of me.
Wow.
And so when I went back to school and I decided I wanted to work with couples and families, I had to do my own growing.
Mm-hmm.
And, when I learned how to kind of grow up and realize that this is also a lifelong process, I
Mm-hmm.
wanted this to be available to the communities in which I lived in and the people that I'm around. And so the birth of the intimacy seminars came
Mm-hmm.
out of wanting other people to be able to experience better relationships and
Mm-hmm.
true intimacy. And so hence the intimacy seminars was birth.
It's phenomenal. I cannot speak on how much fun that we had, and I just think it's just an amazing experience that people have got to try. So I hope that people will go to your website. We'll share that information later so they can book one with you, because it's phenomenal. It really is.
Yes,
And
yes,
I'm so happy to hear you have this focus on building families, and it does start with that husband wife having a strong relationship, because healthy marriages create healthy children, which create
yes,
healthy communities. So thank you very much.
yes.
So you talk about relational potential. Can you
Mm.
can you talk more about that? What exactly do you mean by relational potential, and how do you discover your relational potential?
Okay. So when we think about how we came into this world, we're not created in a vacuum. We're
Right.
created in a system that already exists, right?
Hmm.
So there are circumstances that are happening in our families, and in society. And so when we come into this world and we experience our first family, the family of origin,
Hmm.
we emerge from those families on how to learn how to love, how to fight, how to be loved, and how to connect, right?
Hmm.
And so from what we learn in that first family, now this is not like a blame game or anything like this. This is literally human. This is just a human phenomenon that we all go through.
Hmm.
But we learn how to be seen or not be seen
Hmm.
in our first families.
Hmm.
Now, when we grow up, we take those same things with us, right?
Right.
And
Right.
the potential is so much greater than what we know and what we learned in our families.
Mm.
We physically grow up without any help, right?
Mhm,
But
mhm,
do we emotionally grow up without any help? And so our relational potential has to do with how far are we willing to grow up to have the best relationship that we can have. A lot
okay,
of times we can be in relationships and we're not functioning from the best in us. That's our personal integrity, not
mhm,
from our core. We can
okay,
be functioning from the hurt place, the this is all I know place, like,
mhm,
those kind of things. And so when we learn how to grow up, when I go back to like where I started, like
mhm,
the only thing I know how to do is be in a relationship that comes at the expense of me, which means I'm a recovering over functioner, right? And
okay,
so and so over functioners get in relationships with under functioners, but
mhm,
that doesn't make for me to have the best kind of relationship. So my relationship potential is so much greater when I learn how to be in relationships where I'm not required to overfunction. And so
okay,
I help couples and individuals, because I work with people who are deciding to get married too, or
mhm,
looking for to work on themselves before they get in relationships. When we take a look into the window of self,
mhm,
right, and
mhm,
see where all of that came from, we look at the potential there is for you
okay,
to have a better relationship. So your relationship potential is going from the worst in you to the best
mhm,
in you, and
mm,
living in that place of integrity, who I am today and who I want to be, and closing that gap.
okay. So when a person needs to and wants to build their relational potential, where do they start? I know you said they have to look within, but are there like some specific concrete things that people do to expand or to increase their potential?
Oh, absolutely. How do you respond to conflict? How do you
Mhm,
respond to disagreements?
okay.
How do you connect? A
Mhm,
lot of times people think we have communication issues. We don't have communication issues. There's no way not to communicate. even
Hmm.
when you're not communicating, even if you're not saying anything, you're communicating, right?
Okay.
If I if I'm rolling my eyes at you, I'm
It,
clear I don't
it,
want to talk to you,
right. That's
right?
communication.
So
Okay.
that's communication. And so we
Mm,
don't have a communication issue. We more likely have a connection issue, right?
mm,
And how did we learn how to connect and disconnect? And almost always our answers are in the generations before us and our families.
hmm. Now, how does a couple grow? And I'm asking this question because I remember when you did the intimacy seminar at my home,
Mhm.
talked about how basically what got her or got him before
Mhm.
is not going to is it basically it doesn't really have as much of an impact as it does now because people grow, we evolve. So who I was 20 years ago is not the same who I am
Today.
today. And
Right.
so when I think about, couples that have been married for a while, so my husband and I, we've been married for 19 years, and so
Mhm.
we've grown up together. And so I think
Mhm.
about some of the stuff that I used to get all excited about before, like okay, and same. So how does that tie into relational potential, or does it?
Well, so what happens is like our bodies change, like
Hmm.
everything's changed. I tell the story all the time. When me and my husband got together, I was 15 years old, right? And
Okay.
so the mere thought of seeing him
Hmm.
made me excited, right? But then you add all the stuff. At 15 we didn't have bills together or
Right.
mortgage and kids and all that stuff. So then
Right.
you add all of that on there, right? and
Hmm.
then and then the mere sight of seeing him is not so exciting because I
Right.
want because I want to know, like, did you do the dishes, or did
Right.
you take out the trash and things like that.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
those
Did
are
you
the
pay
things
that
that
bill?
right, did you pay did you pay the bill, right?
Right.
And we still have an unfinished conversation from last night. So
Exactly.
all of those things become a part of what did not used to exist, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So parenting becomes a part of our role. Maintaining the relationship within our spouse becomes a role, and a lot of times once we start parenting, that spouse role becomes to become in the background,
Yes.
right? And
Uh-huh.
and it's important to understand that while I'm a mom, I'm also a wife, and
Hmm.
both of those roles are important, right?
Hmm.
And so I tell people, couples, all the time, like, you're responsible for your turn ons and your turn offs, right?
Okay.
And so
Okay.
while I might not be excited to see him right away because my mind is going, well, we still have an unfinished conversation,
Right.
I'm responsible for my turn offs. I have to not allow myself to go there,
Hmm.
right, and be turned off. How do
Okay.
I get turned back on so that I can
Okay.
connect with him? And a lot of times the answers of why I'm turning off is in our first family of origin. Like,
Interesting.
how did we disconnect from
Hmm.
people? And I encourage people to always go back and do a genogram. Our genogram is like our family tree, right?
Okay.
And our
Hmm.
family tree, but it has all this information.
Hmm.
And you look at how relationships were developed, how
Hmm.
relationships were cut off, things
Hmm.
like that, who suffered illnesses like
Hmm.
diabetes, and how did the family handle that? How did the
Hmm.
family handle, pregnancies and
Hmm.
losses and deaths and conflict? And there's so much information in our families, and it
Hmm.
gives us an opportunity to see who who we've become, and what
Hmm.
parts of those we want to hold on to, and what parts of those we want to kind of change.
Okay. All right. All right. So talk to us about you also I also have heard you talk about the love blueprint. So
Hmm.
tell us about that. What is the love blueprint?
Okay. So we've kind of touched on it already, but the love
Mhm.
blueprint is learning how to love and be loved, right?
Okay.
That love blueprint comes from our first family.
Okay.
And it is set really like early on, like prior to the age of like 10 or 12 years old. We've
Wow.
learned how to love and be loved at a very young age. And so
Mhm.
What I tell people all the time is that your love blueprint is permanent,
Mhm. Okay.
right? So
Okay.
when you, like, your house you're living in right now, you
Mhm.
could go down to the city and look at the blueprint when it was
Mhm.
built. And if you do any remodeling, they just add on to the blueprint, but they don't erase the original blueprint, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so when you come in, when you grow up and you get into a relationship, the way
Mhm.
you learned how to love and be loved in your first family is the exact same way that you learn to love and be loved in your romantic relationships, right?
Okay.
And so I hear people all the time say they grow up and they're like, I'm gonna do the exact opposite of what my parents did, right? And
Mhm.
I say, how do you do that when you don't have a model,
Oh,
right?
wow.
how do how do you do
Yeah.
that when you don't have a model? And then if we're honest, right, if we're really honest, we can be like, oh, you know what, I'm doing that the same way my mom did, and I thought I was
Mhm.
doing the opposite. And that's
Mhm.
because you have this blueprint. You can remodel,
So
right?
that
You
was my
can
next.
go on.
I was gonna ask you that, because what if you don't come from a blueprint that was, stellar? What if your blueprint was a shack versus, a mansion? Like, what do you
Right.
do? Is there hope for people who did not have the best or the most ideal models or examples,
Yeah.
to have a positive
Mm.
marital
so
relationship?
so so let me say this. I think it's important to know that, like, we don't put I don't pathologize the family, right?
Hmm.
I believe that we all experience this human experience
Okay.
of having a blueprint.
Okay.
And I don't believe that anybody has the perfect blueprint. I just don't. That, I don't think there's no perfect being that exists.
Hmm.
To me, I feel like the only one that existed was God, and we're not
Hmm.
that, right?
Right.
And so we have this human nature where we're going to have a human experience, and that's
Hmm.
just how we are. So if that's the case, right? If that's the
Hmm.
case, and what I believe that all of us have some growing up to do,
Hmm.
and we all have some remodeling to do.
Okay.
And yes, we all can remodel. The thing
Okay.
is, the reason why growing up is a lifelong process is because you're
Hmm.
always fighting the original blueprint,
Mm. Wow.
right? So the
Okay.
way your family shuts down, or,
Mhm.
just didn't, we swept things under the rug.
Mhm.
That's our natural thing to do in our now adult marriages.
Mhm.
We want to just shut down, or we want to go, around. I just got off the phone with a couple, and
Mhm.
she was talking about how she was talking about how her and her husband had not talked for 3 days. They had an argument, they hadn't talked
Wow.
for 3 days. And
Mhm.
so I asked them, how did your family handle conflict? And immediately she was like, oh, my mom would give my dad the cold shoulder, and then
Mm.
it started to connect for her, right? So
Mhm.
how do you change the blueprint? You start doing some remodeling, right?
Okay.
Like, this is how my family did it, right?
Mhm.
I didn't
Mhm.
like the way I did it. They did
Mhm.
it. And so I'm going to have to change that. So that means that you're going to have to learn how to hold on to yourself, right?
Mhm.
And you're
Mhm.
going to say that this doesn't come from the best in me. This comes from the part of me that was raised in an environment that was
Mhm.
necessary. I like
Okay.
to give the analogy of that, Jamar, if I call you and say, hey, let's go skiing, right? And
Mhm.
we go
Mhm.
skiing and you prepare, and I say, hey girl, it's gonna be a blizzard, so make sure you come prepared. The morning
Mhm.
we go skiing, we take hot showers, we put on underwear, we put on socks, and we put on long johns, and we get dressed, and then we put on our ski outfit that has it keeps you from getting wet because it's
Mhm.
waterproof. And we
Mhm.
put on our goggles and our beanies and our scarves and our gloves, and nobody thinks that that outfit is weird or
Mm-mm.
wrong or dysfunctional.
Right.
Why? Because it's meant for the environment we're going in. But
Correct.
then if you
Correct.
take that same exact outfit, right,
Mhm.
and you're in Palm Springs in the middle of August,
Then you
right,
look crazy.
then,
Right.
then you look crazy. And what
Right.
what used to protect you for one environment now becomes detrimental to the
Mm.
survival of yourself now,
Okay.
right? So you have to start pulling layers off.
Mhm. Okay. I like that analogy. That's very good. So I personally, when it comes to marriage, I'm
Mhm.
of the belief that when you get married, you don't marry an individual, but you marry a family.
Yeah.
And so when I think about, when we're talking about our, the blueprint, sometimes I feel like when families or married couples come together, it's a clashing of cultures. Like we can be
Mhm.
same skin tone,
Mhm.
African American, but it's still two different households, two different cultures. And so when those parts of the blueprints don't mesh well, what does a couple do so they can create their own? I guess, how do they remodel so they can create their own house versus the
Mhm.
house that he grew up in or the house that I grew up
Mhm. Mhm. Well, that's the thing. If sometimes we think if we're clashing
in?
that we're in the wrong relationship, and
Mhm.
that's not the case. It's actually showing us we're probably in the right relationship
Okay. Okay.
because because
Expand.
because what happens is our relationships are about growing up, and
Mhm.
our partners, our spouses, provide us a mirror in areas that we need to grow up, right?
Mm.
And
Okay.
so and so while you
Okay.
may come from a very different background, or it may appear, but
Mhm.
what I find is a lot of times we come from the same backgrounds, we
Mhm.
just have different ways of navigating. So our
I see.
outfits look different. So
Okay.
perhaps he lived in the snow and you lived in Palm Springs,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And so
Right.
and so there's just different layers of things that need to be peeled off or added
Okay.
on for a different environment. And
Mhm.
that's the beauty of it. You guys can utilize your coping mechanisms and his coping mechanisms to
Mhm.
have an array of coping mechanisms to
Okay.
deal with, because I believe, yes, we do marry. When you don't just marry an individual. When you
Mhm.
marry, you marry you marry his beliefs, his
Yeah.
morals, his
Yes, you do.
family, his
Yes, you do.
culture, and all of the
Mhm.
and the traumas that come with it.
Exactly. Yeah,
Right?
right. And his
Right?
ancestral line too. It's
Exactly,
like, God.
exactly, right, right. And sometimes we don't even know what's in our ancestral line, right? And
Yeah, yeah.
epigenetics say that we can pass our stuff down up to 14 generations. So
That's
you got
biblical. It
yes,
is.
yes,
It's in there to the third
right?
and fourth generation.
Exactly. So,
Wow.
you know, it's important to know where they come from and
Woo!
where you come from and how to deal with it. But if you look at it like, if you see it as this relationship is going to help me become the best me in the we,
Mhm. Mhm.
then you
That's
gonna
me in
see
the week.
it different. That's gonna be the name of my book, Becoming a Better
Okay.
Me in the We.
I like that. I like that.
Right,
That's good.
right.
That's good. My next question, it deals with strengthening marital bonds, but before I go there, um, just as it relates to families coming together with these two individuals,
Mhm.
what are things that you think couples or people that are thinking about getting married, they're about to take that, or they're looking to get married, what are things that they should assess or analyze in themselves first before they decide to choose a partner?
Mhm. Well, here's what I will say. There's some things that you have there, just some key things that you have to know how to do before
Mhm.
you're, not before you get in a relationship, but that will make your relationship a little bit more um easy to navigate. And
Mhm.
that's our ability to hold on to ourselves. Like, who are you at your core,
Mhm.
right?
Okay.
Um you have to know that in and out. When we know who we are at our core, right,
Mhm.
we don't feel threatened by being engulfed by other people.
Okay.
And so, a lot of times when you're dealing with families and you look at the family that you come from,
Mhm.
how did your family cultivate individualism, and how
Mm.
did your family cultivate togetherism? You
Mhm.
know, were you allowed to be this individual within the community of the family? Or
Mhm.
did we all have to think alike? Did we all have to feel alike and things like
Mhm.
that? There's this saying that we all know: if mama ain't happy, ain't
Right.
nobody happy,
Nobody's
right?
happy.
Well, here's the
More
thing.
husbands should understand that. They need to know.
Well, we also have this saying of happy wife, happy life.
Yeah.
And what that means is that then you carry the temperament of
Hmm.
the household. Now, is
Hmm.
that fair to everybody though?
It's
Right?
not at all. It's not.
Right?
But
Right?
it is what it is. No, just kidding.
But that's an area we can grow up in,
Right.
right? Like
Hmm.
I just because I'm upset and I'm working through my stuff doesn't mean that my husband has to come home from
Right.
having a good day at work for him
That's
to then
fair.
have to feel the same thing. Like I should
Hmm.
I am entitled to have my feelings and I should keep them. I don't have to give them to
Right.
him.
I don't have to donate them.
Right. And he doesn't have to feel responsible
Right.
for
Hmm.
them, right?
Right.
So that's the first thing, being able to hold on to yourself.
Hmm.
Two, being able to regulate your own anxieties, right?
Hmm.
Like when we are in families that are so close, what we call
Hmm.
fused,
Hmm.
we can feel the other person. You know when you can feel the tension being
Hmm.
it's so thick, right?
Hmm.
And now I don't know if this belongs to you or if this belongs to me.
Mm.
Right? And so
Mhm.
I feel responsible for doing whatever I need to do to make you happy, mom, right?
Mhm.
Or doing
Mhm.
whatever I need to do to make you happy, wife,
Mhm.
things like that. And so then people aren't free to kind of work on themselves and grow because they feel like they're responsible for your anxiety,
Right.
right?
Right.
When we
Mhm.
grow up in really really close families like that,
Mhm.
it's easy for anxiety and tension and anger to go from one person to the next. So you have to
Mm.
know, oh, that's mom's anger. I'm gonna
Mhm.
let I'm gonna let her, mom, you okay? Do you need anything? But
Mhm.
I'm not gonna take her anger on.
Okay.
Does that
Okay.
make sense? So
Yes,
it's
it does.
holding on to yourself, your ability to regulate your anxieties, right?
Mhm.
And being able to self-soothe. When you
Mhm.
can soothe yourself, you don't require other people to soothe you,
Mhm.
right?
Oh,
And
right.
so those are some of the things you want to look at when you're contemplating getting married. Like
Mhm.
how did my family handle conflict? How did they handle cutoffs? Like what were the lessons that you learned about how you were loved and how you deserved love? And then the other thing is, what relationships do you need to go back and strengthen before you get married?
Mm.
Because
That's
if
a
you
good
learned
question.
it if you
That's a good one.
learned it in your family of origin,
Mhm.
the best way to actually resolve that is to go back to that where you learned it.
Okay. Now let me ask you another question. What if you don't really have any models? And I ask this question for two reasons. You and I both know that the percentage of, particularly with African American children that are born to single parents or into
Mhm.
single to moms is high.
Mhm.
It's over 70%. And
Mhm.
that hurts me
Mhm.
that there's such a high amount of our kids that are born into a single parent household. And I mean, it is what it is. A lot of them still have really great parents, but that's hard. I mean, it takes two
Mhm.
to make them. I think
Mhm.
if you have a good mom and a good dad, it's ideal that the two of them can raise them together. So
Mhm.
that's part one. And part two, my mom, she she grew up in a single parent household, and she was actually raised by her grandmother,
Mhm.
and she came from a long line of matriarchs who did not have successful marriages. And so my mom has often told me and my sister that when she was growing up, her grandmother would tell her, "Don't ask me for any advice about any man," because she had
Mhm.
nothing positive to say.
Mhm.
And so my mom, her example or what she did to get an ideal of what a real good marriage was, I think, was watching the show Father Knows Best.
Mhm.
And before my father passed away, she and my mom and dad had been married for 38 and a half years. So they, it was literally till death to do us part. And they went the distance, but she didn't have that example from her mom, from her grandmother. It just was not there. And I know that a lot of our people see that. And so I'm thinking about, well, where you going back to get your models or your examples. How do you do that if you don't have an example of where to start? This is in the vein of having strong marriages.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's the case for many
Hmm.
many people. They don't have the model.
Right. And I
But
know
that's
some have bad, models where their parents are married, but it's just toxic, and that's
yeah,
just as bad. Like you
yeah,
need to get
right.
out of that relationship. Okay.
Exactly, right,
So I want
right,
to make sure I'm not saying that just because a couple is married, then that's because no.
right, right.
Go on.
This is where you begin to build support systems.
Hmm.
Who else do you know is married?
Okay.
Having married friends,
Hmm.
having people who've had long-term relationships,
Hmm.
um, you know, uh, reaching out also to marital therapy, like
Hmm.
that. That's
Yeah.
a huge thing, like getting into couples therapy where you can work on some things where people are trained
Hmm.
to help you navigate growing up.
Hmm.
Right.
I think
So
people should use it. It's great.
let me tell you something. I swear by it. Like it's amazing,
Hmm.
and so it's important to get to have a support system. So
Hmm.
maybe you didn't have someone who was a good model for you,
Hmm.
but building your support system, older couples that
Okay.
are available to you, whether that's
Hmm.
through your church or sororities or
Hmm.
things like that, open up your network so you have access, you
Okay.
know,
You can
to
build a community around you,
ex-
basically.
exactly. Listen, we heal better in communities.
Hmm. Wow. Okay.
We
Versus
heal better.
isolation.
The research shows
Hmm.
we heal better in communities.
Hmm.
So we cannot continue to have this independent mindset that's
Hmm.
killing us,
Hmm. This
right?
culture, though, that we live in, this American society, it feeds that, though. So we have to depend on each other.
So remember when I said you have to be able to hold on to yourself?
Hmm.
At
Hmm.
our core, who we are, how God developed us,
Yeah.
He designed us for connection,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? So for us to go against that,
Hmm.
that's dis-ease,
Okay.
disease that's in.
Okay.
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 So we are designed for connection.
Hmm.
Trauma though will rewire us for
Hmm.
protection. And so
Hmm.
we have to fight against wanting to isolate. That whole independent, I don't need anyone, that's a
Hmm.
trauma response,
Mm. That's good. That's good.
right?
Okay. So let me switch gears a bit now. So we talked about people who are thinking about going into marriage. Now, what about those of us that already are married? Talk
Mm,
to us about what couples should do to strengthen their marital bonds. Like give advice, and particularly in the area of intimacy, because of course that's a huge part of marriage.
yes, yes. So there is levels of intimacy. There's two levels
Okay.
of intimacy, and then there's types of intimacy, right?
Okay.
And so the levels of intimacy is the not from the so the less mature is
Hmm.
other validated intimacy. I'm intimate with you because you validate who I am, right?
Okay.
And then there is self-validated intimacy. I know
Hmm.
who I am and I can show up and I'm okay with you seeing who I am. Intimacy, into me you see. So
Mm.
I allow you to see who I am authentically, and
Okay.
I show up
Hmm.
and let you see me,
Wow.
right?
Hmm.
Without any validation, right?
Okay.
That's the most mature level of
Okay.
intimacy. And then there's types of intimacy, right?
Hmm.
And those are the things, and sometimes people tend to think of, when they think intimacy, they think sex, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
And so and not all sex is intimate,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Right? But there's types of intimacy. You have intellectual intimacy. I
Hmm.
tell couples all the time, focus on the main five intimacies, and there's more than just those five, but there's intellectual intimacy, emotional intimacy, there's experiential intimacy, physical intimacy, there's spiritual intimacy.
See, we
And
don't
so
learn these things. I didn't know there was 5. I mean, you're telling me there's more, but I mean, I've never heard it like that because, we do think of, okay, the physical side, and then, okay, we're going out to dinner or whatever. We're talking, we're connecting that way. But all the other things that you mentioned, this is great. Keep going.
Yes. So when you think about like your intellectual intimacy, like
Hmm.
right now, intellectual intimacy might be at an all high or all low, because
Hmm.
intellectual intimacy is our ability to kind of really discuss things that are going on in
Okay.
our world from an intellectual perspective. So
Okay.
maybe that's dissecting your favorite song and what it
Hmm.
means to you, like dissecting the words, or watching a movie and seeing each other's perspective and what it meant to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you have like politics, of course,
Hmm.
with our climate today, that
Right.
that is a lot of, but intellectual
That's low hanging
intellectual,
fruit.
right. Intellectual intimacy is really kind of letting your partner in your internal world,
Okay.
right? Because what happens is we practice intellectual intimacy usually in the beginnings of our relationship. They
Hmm.
say, how do you know a married couple versus a dating couple in a restaurant?
How? Share.
The dating couple is talking and they're sharing ideas and what's going on in their head. The married couple, they're eating or now on their phone, right?
Okay.
So,
Okay.
intellectual intimacy is really sharing what those thoughts and things that are going on for you, having
Hmm.
those conversations. There are different, couple cards where you can ask each other questions and let your partner in,
Hmm.
right? So
Hmm.
that's your intellectual intimacy. When
Okay.
we build upon that, you see the connection change
Mm.
too, you
Hmm.
know then there's also emotional intimacy, like building our emotional vocabulary. We are more than just sad, mad, glad, and happy, right?
Hmm.
There
Hmm.
are there are things that I would choose to do different if I thought you were sad,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Then I would try to make you happy. But if I thought
Hmm.
you were disappointed, I would approach it very differently, right?
Right.
So emotional intimacy is actually um building on your emotional vocabulary and how to respond from
Hmm.
different ways of being, right? I
Okay.
like to say couples can use journals and write letters to each other, or
Hmm.
ongoing journal. You put an entry like how you're feeling, what you're doing, like what made you feel a particular way, that you guys can keep on the nightstand and write in it and be able to read it, like share your emotional side with each other.
I like that. I like
Right?
that. Hmm.
Write love letters to each other. That's
Hmm.
that's emotional intimacy. There's experiential intimacy. How does your partner experience you? This is where you're spending money, and like maybe you're going to the movies or things like that. You're spending time. But
Hmm.
how does your partner experience you? And while we are in this, limited space during COVID, we
Hmm.
might have a limited space, but our imagination
Right.
capacity is infinite. So we
Hmm.
can experience a date in the living room,
Hmm.
on the floor having a picnic. So
Right.
there's so many things that you can do to have so that your partner experiences you
Hmm.
in a great way, right? So we're
Okay.
cognizant of that. And
You
then
know,
there's yeah,
I got to interject really quickly with what you're talking about. It requires effort. I feel
yes,
like
it's
sometimes we can get
intentional.
we get lazy, and we're just like, okay, I don't feel like doing all that.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
if you
yeah.
really value your relationship, you put in the work.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to die, quit, don't
Hmm.
do any work.
Okay. Okay. I'm sorry to cut you off.
No,
Continue.
no, 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 no. That's fine. And
Mm-hmm.
then there's also spiritual intimacy. Spiritual
Mm-hmm.
intimacy is, how do we spend sacred time together? Are we praying together? Are we praying for each other? Are we
Mm-hmm.
praying with each other? The research shows that couples who pray with each other,
Mm-hmm.
right, versus praying for each other, praying with each other, have a more satisfying marriages,
Can
right?
you say that again? Just one more time.
The research shows that couples who pray with each other have more satisfying marriages, right?
Okay,
So
there is an old saying, the family that prays together stays
stays
together.
together.
It's rooted in research, people. Okay.
Yes, right. And doing meditation too.
Hmm.
So me and my husband, we actually do yoga together, and
Okay.
that's a spiritual time for us too as well.
Uh-huh.
So we're learning how to relax and breathe and be in our bodies and next to each other while we're
Okay.
doing it, right? So that's the
Hmm.
spiritual. And then there's physical intimacy. And
Hmm.
while physical intimacy is interchangeable with sexual intimacy, but physical intimacy does not just include sex, it's
Okay.
touch, right?
Okay.
So dancing together, right? Massaging each other's, right? And then there's
Hmm.
also sex too. And so adding something new to the bedroom, like
Hmm.
trying something new,
Right.
sex is fun, sex is messy, sex
Hmm.
is sloppy, sex is,
Hmm.
all kind of things, and just allowing yourself to go there and have fun with it. But remember those levels of intimacy.
Hmm.
That mature
Hmm.
level is your ability to show up and
Right.
self-validate. A
Okay.
lot of times we can have difficulties with the emotional intimacy, intellectual intimacy, and physical intimacy
Hmm.
because we're waiting for our partner to validate who we are. So we don't
Hmm.
necessarily show up. But if you
Okay.
know who you are and you're at your core, you're going to show up goofy and you're going to show up laughing and fun, and
Hmm.
that kid part of us, that play. We
Hmm.
don't just need to play when we're kids. We need to play as adults too.
That's right. I totally agree.
So that's how you
Wow.
keep it fun and new.
That is awesome. This is you have dropped a lot of jewels, and I know that the people that will watch this are going to get some really good information. This has really been a
Good.
joy for me. I appreciate all that you have shared.
Absolutely.
Now, I'm confident that people are going to want to be able to find you, to, you know, connect with you. So, can you tell people what's the best way to reach out to you?
Yes. So my website is www.theintimacyseminars with the
Okay.
s.com. So theintimacyseminars.com. I am on Facebook and Instagram as The Intimacy Seminars, and on Twitter at got_intimacy.
Okay.
So
All right.
yes.
So you all that are watching, make sure you reach out to her. Book an intimacy seminar. You will love it. I promise you, you'll love it. Or
It's
if you just
very
need to meet with
experiential.
her, just you and your spouse, or one on just you by yourself, contact her. She's a wonderful person. Um, thank you so much, Jeshana. This has been
Thank
amazing.
you for having
But,
me.
before I shut this interview down, is there anything else that you wanted to share with viewers? Any last advice or anything that you want to give?
I always say becoming one doesn't mean losing who you are as an individual. It
Hmm.
means using who you are as an individual to strengthen the marriage. And
Okay.
so we have to be our whole self,
Hmm.
right, in our relationships to have better relationships.
Okay. And I say amen to that. All
Okay.
right. Well, thank you very much. And again, viewers, make sure you reach out to Dr. Johnson. You won't regret it. And with that, I'm going to close this out. Blessings to all. Take care.